You're listening to Under the Shell Podcast, the best in America.
Welcome to Under the Shell, presented by Testudo Times. I'm Brennan Weissel.
Sam Jane.
And Michael Howes. And this week we have on our first repeat guest in Under the Shell history. He doesn't need an introduction at all. You all know who he is. Gary Williams, Hall of Fame basketball coach, championship winning coach for Maryland basketball.
Coach Gary Williams, thanks for joining us. Coach, let's start right away. What did you see from the Terps on Monday night against Manhattan, specifically Derik Queen? Give us the basketball coach analysis.
Well, I was there. I wanted to see Derik Queen. I wanted to see the team, obviously, too. But Derik Queen's unique because he's that 6'9", 6'10" size. It's kind of the new breed of player that's very comfortable playing on the three-point line, as well as being able to post up. It used to be, you had a good inside player. You want him to stand on the block, that type of thing. But in Queen, he has a lot of things he can do that can really help you from the perimeter. So he can go out, be comfortable facing. He can get a rebound, put it down a couple times in a dribble, make a 50-foot pass to a guy going in for a layup. He's got a lot of things that make him a complete player, which is unusual for a guy his age. He's young, he's a freshman, and yet he plays at a much more mature level.
Do you recall a time as a coach that you had a freshman have that dominant of a performance in their debut? And just what does that say about him? He looked pretty comfortable on Monday. What does that say about him and how that bodes for the rest of the season, the way he looked on Monday?
Yeah, in 1994, I had a freshman named Joe Smith who became the number one pick in the draft his sophomore year. He had 27 points and 12 rebounds against number 13 Georgetown in an overtime win. So it was a little different competition against Georgetown than it was against, Manhattan. And Joe nobody knew who Joe was. Queen, nowadays guys come in with so much advanced publicity, which Joe Smith, nobody knew who he was. He was a guy named Joe Smith. And, that was our first game. That was a TV game, which was a big deal back then. It was a day after Thanksgiving on ESPN when nobody else was playing. And so there was a lot of things that made that good. Now Queen, you look at his first game, you saw no signs of him being nervous, anything like that. He looked very adjusted to the attention that he got pregame and all those things that come along with being a Maryland basketball player. So his future really looks good.
Coach, how do you expect Kevin Willard to use? I mean, I know that when you coach, it's a little different in terms of spacing and things like that, but a too big system is really, I mean, Queen is so talented that you have to make it work, but it's not as common as we used to see. How would you go about playing Queen and Reese together? Because Willard talked about the challenges it brings, especially with foul trouble and things like that.
Well, it's you need a third guy that you can rotate. So if you do start both big guys, which I think is a great way to go given their talent, then you have that third guy. If a guy gets two quick fouls, say at the start of the game, you have the third guy you can bring in, let the guy rest for a couple minutes, and then bring him back in the game when he calms down or whatever. And so as long as you can find that third guy, I don't have any problems with starting both guys because they're the two best inside players. So, people say that all the time. Well, you shouldn't play both big guys. Well, if they're two of your best five players, let's get serious. You play your best players. You don't worry what people say. You do what's best for your team. And I think, Kevin certainly has the experience, coming from the Big East, things like that, 2 years at Maryland. He knows that. And, he'll figure out a way to accomplish that without putting the team in jeopardy.
I want to look over at the schedule a little bit. Obviously, when you were coaching, Maryland did not have to take so many trips to the West Coast, very few at that. When you look at the start of the Maryland schedule, I'm not sure how much you've looked into it, but Maryland doesn't have to get on a plane for over a month until they go face Purdue on December 8th. How important for that as a team to be able to play so many home games and kind of gel as a group in the first month of the season?
I think that helps with when you have new players like Maryland does, and you're trying to get things to play a certain way for the rest of the season, not just for the Manhattan game or whatever. You're still trying, you've got the next 2 games to really work on some things before you hit, I believe it's Marquette, in a very tough game. But playing at home certainly is an advantage, but we've got to get the students out. Monday night, you can't tell me all the students were studying on a Monday night. I worked at colleges for 42 years. Come on, give me a break. All of a sudden, everybody got smart. Let's get serious here. Get the students to the game, because here's why. When you get into the Big Ten schedule, every place you'll play has a great home court, because most Big Ten campuses are isolated. Forget the West Coast schools, but the traditional Big Ten schools are isolated. It's the only show in town. So you either go to the basketball game or you don't have much to do that night. And so we need the support from our students. That wasn't right for opening game, with especially with a player like Derik Queen, who anybody that knows anything in the country about college basketball wants to see him play. Well, our students had a chance to see him play, and they got to get there. They got to be there, and hopefully they're there for the Mount St. Mary's game.
I wanted to ask what you saw from two transfers, their debuts on Monday night as well. Jacoby Gillespie and Rodney Rice. Jacoby filling in that point guard role now this season, adds 16 points, 5 assists. And then Rodney Rice off the bench, 12 points, hit 2 threes. What do you think that their additions can do for the team this season?
Well, Gillespie really impressed me. The numbers you just said obviously were, for a point guard, very good. But his defense, he was playing against a tough guard. You play a game like Manhattan, and they might not be as good as you, but they always have those 5'10", 5'11" guys that are really quick, that can really go with the ball. And he did a very good job with that. And that's going to be big. Your point guard has to be able to stop the ball a lot of times in transition. And I think Gillespie really showed last night that he has that ability to be able to do that. Rodney Rice, the funny thing about Rodney Rice, I coached his father for a year at Boston College. And his dad transferred to Richmond and had a very good career at Richmond. And Rodney comes in known as a shooter, but he hasn't played for a year and a half, basically. So he needs the game reps. And I think we all could see how much better he played in the second half as opposed to the first half. And that's going to happen, especially when you have a new team with 6, 7 new players trying to fit everybody together. And, people think everything should be perfect that first game. That first game is completely different than any exhibition game or scrimmage. It counts, number one. And number two, the nerves are there, which might not have been there for other games. So it takes a while to get through that. And I think Maryland really came out the second half and just showed where they can be. Now the key is for any team, not just Maryland, is to get that more toward 40 minutes instead of 20 minutes. And so I think you'll see that against Mount St. Mary's, that effort to try to play at an elite level, for going toward 40 minutes.
Coach Willard talked to. I mean, he played 10 guys in the first half, which I think is a very season opener like rotation. And said he hasn't really figured it out yet what he's looking at. When do you expect him, and when would you go about kind of trimming your rotation down? Is it Big Ten plays at that Marquette game? And how do you go about that? Are you just playing a bunch of different bodies to see, what they do on the floor? Is it just a practice thing? Like, how do you kind of figure out which guys you trust to get on the floor?
Well, that's really a good point. You have to find out who the game guys are. In other words, some guys look really good in practice. All of a sudden, you turn on the scoreboard, people come to the games, and they're not as good. Other guys don't play as well in practice, but play better in games. And so you have to find that out. And these first 3 games will really help Maryland, because when you go against Marquette, you want your rotation. You want to have 8 guys. For me, if I could get to 8, I'd be a happy coach, because we pressed a lot and we needed more than 5. But you get past 8 and it gets hard. Like you keep looking down the bench. Well, that guy should be playing, or that guy, and it's a cruel world sometimes. So you have to earn your way in practice before you can show what you're doing in the game. So that was always my theme when I was coaching. Look, I'm going to make some decisions here that guys aren't going to be popular with, but I'm going to do them to the best of my ability, watching what you guys do in practice every day. And then the games, the first 3 games. How do you respond to the game pressure, the game situation? And so you can, like I said, Kevin's been around. He'll get it down to where he's comfortable with the rotation. And it'd be nice if you can do it by Marquette, but that's not necessarily going to make or break your season if you don't have a rotation by the Marquette game.
You just mentioned how you love to press. Kevin Willard has mentioned already this season that's something he's really going to focus on. Given what you saw on Monday night and what you know about this roster, how do you think this team sets up to press?
Well, I think the quickness is there. You even starting two big players. Reese certainly has the ability to react in a pressure defense situation. Queen also shows that he's a student of the game. He knows how to read double teams, things like that, which are important if you're a pressing team. And so I think pressing with the depth that they do have, now that this is the other thing, you can press in practice. And see, that's the only way you get good as a pressing team is to press in practice. And if you only have 7, 8 guys that are any good, then practice, it's kind of one-sided. You can't really get a feel. But when you have 10 guys, you can go 5-on-5 in practice, both teams pressing, both good pressing teams, then you find out. Then you get good as a pressing team. And I think that's the advantage this year that Kevin Willard has.
Coach, what's your biggest concern with this team?
Biggest concern is like I think a lot of teams now with transfer portals, the NIL, how do you get new guys every year to fit in and to blend? In other words, they have a situation where they're going to have to play new guys, and that's true with say 70% of the teams in the country. Very few teams, have that 4 or 5 player returning situation, which you used to have. You used to be able to do that, but now guys leave, guys come, for different reasons. A lot of it's NIL, but a lot of it's just believing that they'll get more minutes somewhere else. And, a coach only can control certain things. And adding the NIL and the transfer portal has taken away some control for the coaches, which isn't a good thing, speaking as a coach. Now, we'll see how it goes, but I think that's going to be the big thing, how quick everybody can adjust to each other. And, you go through some tough things in practice, that people don't see. Players have to learn how to get along with everybody, for example. I remember when we had Steve Blake as our point guard and John Gilchrist came in, those guys actually fought in practice one time. And that's, you don't like to see that, but at the same time, it shows you that they really care. They both wanted to play. And so that's with new players, you have to go through that. You have to get through a process where people respect each other. You don't have to like everybody, but you have to respect everybody, and that's the key.
Coach, I wanted to touch on NIL for a second. A lot of heralded coaches have retired recently. Some of them, it was a little earlier than expected. Of course, Jay Wright a few years ago at Villanova, Tony Bennett at Virginia most recently. And that changed landscape of college sports has been a factor. How do you think that these shifts with NIL have affected the demands and pressures of college coaches today compared to when you were coaching at Maryland?
Well, it's different. There's no doubt about it. You have to have money if you want to be successful now for the NIL. You can't. People would like to say, "Well, we believe in the old school," and that's all nice and all that. But a kid is going to make his decision based on how much he can make most of the time. Let's get serious. Rah rah for the old school. It's not out there anymore. It's more okay. How much are you going to give me is the first question you're asked in a recruiting visit, and so you don't have to like it, but if you want to be a coach today, you have to accept that's part of the deal of coaching. And coaches are making a lot of money, uh, doing what they do. And a lot of schools now have gone to almost hiring a general manager where that guy's in charge of NIL, transfer portal, keeping up to date on all those things. So they can come in a meeting with a head coach and say, okay, this is where we are. This is what we have left in the NIL transfer portal. This is the guys that we might be interested in. And it saved the coach all that preliminary time. And I think that's what coaches need right now. They need somebody, and they have more people in the staff now. So they need people that can give them information that's, cutting away all the garbage that you usually have to go through to make a decision.
Despite all those hurdles and things you have to jump through now to get a player in terms of NIL and, first question you said they're going to ask is how much they're going to get paid. Maryland was able to recruit Derik Queen and get him to College Park. So I have to ask you, how would you like to, coach Derik Queen if you'd had him on your roster in that time when you were here?
I'd love to coach him. And I think I'd be in the same situation as uh, Coach Willard is right now. You're finding out something every day that Derik Queen can do. Uh, he made a pass the other night against Manhattan. I don't know if anybody got excited about it, but I did. He got a rebound, took two dribbles, and threw like a 50-foot pass right on the money, like a quarterback does in football. And you don't have many inside players playing in the NBA that can make that play. And, so you find out about your players. And that was the thing with Joe Smith, what I was talking about with the Georgetown game. I saw him go against Othell Harrington, who was an All-American back then for Georgetown. And I go, wow, he can do all those things against a really good player. And so that's the next step with Derik Queen is, okay, when we play Marquette, they're going to have big guys that are aggressive, strong, try to bump you a lot of times when you get on the block. And, some teams don't have that ability because they don't have the big guys. And now you watch how Queen reacts to that. So it's going to be a learning process for a while. I'd say the month of December, you get a couple Big Ten games, you get Marquette, you get Villanova. You're going to really have a good feel, not just for Queen, but for the team as you get into January and, most of your Big Ten games.
Well, guys, there's nobody better to talk to us about Maryland hoops and coaching strategies than Gary Williams. So all that insight, you can find it under the shell. Coach Williams, we really appreciate your time. Hope to see you around College Park as you were on Monday. And thank you so much for hopping on.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate being on, and I still get excited when I see those games, and the crowd. We've got to get the crowd. Whatever you guys can do, see that's going to be decisive in the Big Ten because you look at the Big Ten this year, it's pretty even. There's no one team like Purdue last year with Edie that you say, well, they're the best team. No, I think Maryland's right in there with you can put 7, 8 teams probably in that top tier, and Maryland's one of them. But if we don't have the same crowd as the other schools do, that's really going to affect our ability to be successful. So thanks.
All right, we talked about the start of the season with Gary. We're one game in. Usually we do our season preview before the first game. This year, we did it after the Manhattan game. But, we have a little bit of help because of that. But, guys, going into the men's basketball season, how are we feeling? What are your early thoughts?
Derik Queen looks like the best freshman in the Big Ten, if not the country. Put up the first 20-20 game in Maryland basketball history. First time since Michael Beasley, a freshman's done it in their debut. Queen looked like the real deal, granted against competition that he's probably played before at Montverde, but a lot of his baskets were not opponent based. You see the duck-in scores that he had in the post, mid-range jumpers, all things that translate to higher level competition. If he plays like that, he's not going to score 20-20 every night, but if that level of play is maintained the rest of the season, Maryland has one of the most dominating players in the conference, paired with Juju Reese, who we know is a phenomenal big man. They probably have the best front court in the conference, and that's a good place to start when you're looking at this roster.
Yes, it was very promising for the newcomers on Maryland's roster that there was a lot of hype around. You got Jacoby Gillespie kind of getting into Jameer Young's role from last season. He had 16 points, 5 assists in his first game with the Terps. You also saw Rodney Rice off the bench, put up 12 points, put up 2 threes. It was also interesting to see Malachi Palmer and Jay Young and Tara Gapari play meaningful minutes as well. Not sure how that'll translate once it gets into Big Ten season, more serious gameplay. That was also pretty good to see from the Terps. And yeah, just overall, very positive showing from the transfers, from Derik Queen especially. And Kevin Willard seemed pretty happy post-game about what he saw.
Yeah, other names you didn't mention, Jordan Geronimo on the team last year. Willard talked about it after the game. He's definitely in more of his natural role, but we'll have to see how much of a role they carved out for him on this year's team. Also, Chance Stevens on the team last year really got some limited minutes. It's going to be interesting to see how much he plays. Last year there was so much talk about three-point shooting and what would have been if he was healthy, but at the end of the day, it's hard to know if we'll really get that many minutes this year, but Let's break it down. They're one game into the season. They have a pretty easy schedule. When I say pretty easy schedule, they have an easy schedule to start the year. They don't get on a plane until December 8th. I mean, that is a very lucky start to the season. But what are your guys' thoughts on the way this season begins, right? Because they have, 5 games at home to start the season. 4 are going to be automatic wins, and then they play Marquette. It's just, last year Maryland obviously had that first game against an opponent I forget because it was a very easy win, and they went to that invitational and they lost those 2 games. So just looking at the start of the season schedule, how are you guys feeling? What are your thoughts?
I don't think that we'll see early season losses like Davidson and UAB last year. Last year in the season opener against Mount St. Mary's, the Terps only won by 15 points. The other day against Manhattan, they won by 30 points. It seemed like even with all the roster turnover that they had following the offseason, it seemed like they were pretty cohesive. There were some lumps in the first half, but other than that, the second half, they really got rolling. So I don't really see them dropping games like UAB or Davidson again. Marquette will be an interesting one. Marquette did take a step down this year. So that'll be interesting to see how they compete. Of course, Villanova, not the same Villanova teams of the past, but that'll be interesting to see. And then really scroll down the schedule, then you finally get to games like Ohio State, Purdue, and this is where maybe you'll see the Terps start to drop some games, but I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty good early season slate for Maryland.
I don't think that reacting to a Manhattan game, that a team that went 7-23 last season and gave up 101 points to Kansas in the season opener, should quell any of the concerns Maryland fans had. Let's not forget that they were only up 3 points at the half and were shooting. I think not a single starter had made a 3-pointer up until that point. I think that remains. Willard said in the press conference that he's not concerned. He trusts his team has shot makers, and I think they're better suited to shoot well from 3 than last year. But I think that you can't judge a team based off one performance. I think I still have concerns about this team. How do Queen and Reese play together? They're both in foul trouble. What does that do? What does the perimeter playmaking look like outside of Jacoby Gillespie? They really need Deshaun Harris-Smith to take a step up, and we can't count on that until we see it. I think that Marquette and, like Mike said, Marquette and Villanova will both be solid tests. I think Marquette, mediocre Big East team, same with Villanova. Cam Jones is a really good player for the Golden Eagles, and Villanova has some guys, but those are games you like to have on the schedule, right? Because they're, home games against potential quad 1 or quad 2 wins if we're talking about March, and you like to how it stacks up here early for Maryland. I just don't think that, there's a lot of conclusions other than Derik Queen might be really good that you can draw from a game 1 win against, a team that is horrible. Let's just put it bluntly. So, think that if you had concerns about this team, Monday night shouldn't have changed them. And if you have hopes and optimism, then Monday night should have changed it either. So I think that we'll know more in the coming weeks.
One player we didn't really get a good chance to look at was Selton Miguel. Coach Willard postgame said he was dealing with an ankle injury. He did start, played about 15 minutes, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see once he recovers from that injury and is able to play in the second half of games and not just kind of play just to get into the groove of playing with the squad, what his role is going to be, because it's clear what Gillespie's role is. It's looking pretty clear that Rice is going to be that scorer off the bench for them, but it'll be neat to see what Selton does once he's healthy.
Yeah, I know. Let's talk about last year's team compared to this year's team. The 2 big issues last year, among many, were depth as well as 3-point shooting. Depth, I think that issue is definitely solved. If you look at the roster, there's 8 or 9 guys who you could legitimately say they will play meaningful minutes. 3-point shooting, I just don't know. If you have Derik Queen and Julian Reese on the floor at the same time, which Cameron Willard said will happen sometimes, but not that much. But you have one of them on the floor. The hope is that they can draw in a defender and then kick it out for an open 3 when they get doubled, something like that. But the thing is, you need guys to knock down those shots, and you need to have a well-run offense. And after one game, you didn't really see it. And I think you would have said the same thing going into the first game, is that, it was a big issue last year, and they brought guys on. They totally brought people in to fix it. But 3-point shooting is one of those things. It's like either you have it or you don't, and you can't magically fix it through the middle of the season. And so it's something that I think we're going to find out within the first week and a half, 2 weeks of the season. And then, if you don't have it, you're going to have to build the offense from there. I think watching Monday night's game, nothing really stood out to me that meant, oh my God, this team is going to be incredible at 3-point shooting. And it looked, the offense looked more similar to last year's team than 2 years ago's team. So those were just my initial reactions. The 3-point shooting is going to have to be there for this team to be really competitive in the Big Ten. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of those additions they made to fix the 3-point shooting. Transfer adds: Jacoby Gillespie from Belmont, Selton Miguel from USF, Rodney Rice comes in from Virginia Tech, Jalen Young, Tafari Gapare, and then Derik Queen, obviously, and Malachi Palmer, the 2 freshmen. Brendan talked about the 3-point shooting. It was all very pointed. It seemed like Willard talked about they needed to bring in perimeter shot making, perimeter playmaking. Gillespie, Rice, Miguel kind of fill that. And then anytime you have a chance to add a 5-star freshman, you're going to jump on it. So clearly an emphasis there. And I want to ask you two, who do we think out of those additions is going to have the biggest return, right? Like expectations relative to the value they produce. Who do we think of the newcomers is going to kind of break through this year?
I would say Jacoby Gillespie. Willard kind of talked about it post game, but kind of filling in for Jameer Young and putting up 16 points and 5 assists in his first game starting in that role. It's a very promising sign for this team that they're going to have a point guard. Yes, he's not going to be able to replicate Jameer's scoring. It would have been really hard to find that through the transfer portal anyways. But being able to find a point guard who can score, who can distribute the ball, who's going to be able to get it to Queen down low, Juju down low, find the shooters, the spacing on the floor. It's a very positive sign for Maryland for Monday night.
I'm going to go Rodney Rice. Didn't play at all last year at Virginia Tech. He's had a complete year off. And for someone who didn't play at all competitive basketball in the last year, Kevin Willard said he's looked the best in practice, and that has to give you hope if you're a Maryland fan. I think he brings a dynamic scoring offense that Maryland will need, getting to the hoop, as well as a decent ability to shoot threes and play defense. So we'll have to see. Speaking of defense, Maryland was kind of back in the Kevin Willard style of the press. It definitely wasn't a press that you'd see in January and February. There were kind of some holes and gaps, but it's clear that that's something that Kevin Willard wants to do this season. What did you guys see Monday night, and what are your overall thoughts on the press and defense this season?
Well, I mean, I wrote about this exact topic, and I think Kevin Willard wants to get back to what he did year one, and they didn't want to go away from it last year. They just had a dismal offense, and it's hard to press if you're not putting the ball in the basket. They clearly think that they have the athletic guards. I mean, Deshaun Harris-Smith, if you think about it, is the prototypical defender for a press, right? He's long, he's athletic, quick, can guard multiple positions. You pair him with Gillespie, who was a solid defender at Belmont. I think it'll be nice to see what he does. He averaged over 2 steals a game at Belmont last season. And I think with a decreased offensive load, that matters a lot for a point guard, right? It's hard to play consistent 30 to 35 minutes of defense, especially if you're pressing already. And then if you add on having to shoulder a massive offensive load like Jameer Young did, there's just no way. I don't care how physically fit you are, you're not going to be a productive defender. So I think that having that is going to add a lot of kind of juice to this press. The one concern I have is Queen's mobility and versatility paired with Reese, right? I think that those two have to figure it out, right? Transition defense was a struggle that Willard talked about at media day. He said we haven't really figured it out yet. And if Queen can't, they're not going to move Reese off the back line where he's in the back other side of the court. But if Queen can figure out the kind of wing second line defense of the press, you got a chance to have a really good unit there. Willard's team averaged around forcing 12 turnovers a game. His first 2 seasons, they were right around that on Monday night. I would expect that number to increase if Derik can figure it out there and they don't have to not press, because I think that this team has enough versatile and long defenders that can kind of make it go, and they'll have a better offense, I think, this year, because it's hard to have much worse.
Yeah, when you're talking about offense as it relates to the press, that was the way that the press was the way that Maryland was able to win the Purdue game 2 years ago. So getting back to that is definitely a promising sign for Maryland if they're able to do it, right? You can have 7 best defenders on your roster, but if you can't actually score, who cares? So we'll have to see. I think the only thing we haven't touched on yet is Derik Queen. Incredible recruit. Definitely showed it Monday night. Very high expectations after that game. He's definitely a very calm and has a very, he's very joking around in the press conference, and that gives kind of a light manner to him. But with that all being said, the expectations are high, and he knows that. But do you think he'll be able to fulfill on those, Sam? What are your thoughts on Derik Queen?
I think Derik Queen is a perfect fit for modern college basketball as a big man, and that he's an old fit for college basketball. I think that he's an incredibly skilled and mature big man, on the floor. Assistant coach Greg Manning told me he plays with a pace that he's never seen from a freshman and is rare for a college basketball player, right? Like we talked about last year, I remember Deshaun Harris-Smith, right? Very fast, very aggressive downhill driver, but he didn't know how to change speeds, right? And when you're going one speed the entire time, it's much easier for a defender to guard you. Queen knows how to change his pace, use the kind of deceleration, acceleration, and I think his vision gives him a huge advantage. There was a pass he had on Monday night, and I'm sure we can clip it, where he went with the right shoulder over the top, skip pass to the corner. That's so rare for a big man, much less a freshman. Another when he's running a transition break, got caught up in the air a little bit, and coaches tell you don't pass out of the air. Players do it all the time. It's part of the game. He goes around, basically scans the entire floor, realizes nobody's open, trailer dump pass off to the backup point guard. I'm blanking on his name. Incredible play yet again. I think Queen's vision, pace, and ability to understand how defenses are going to react to him is huge. Now, I do want to caution, I do think that his lack of shooting might hurt them at points. I think that if he's not able to develop a even like 32 to 31% 3-point jump shot, you're looking at an offense that's definitely cramped in spacing. But if I had to put a number to it, I think a reasonable expectation for him is 15-6, 15-7, which would definitely put him on the All Big Ten freshman team and potentially would put him on an All Big Ten team. It could go higher than that. I'm just thinking with the offensive kind of archetype that Maryland has, that's what you're looking at. And I think every single Maryland fan would take a season like that, because that would probably mean Derik Queen leaves and is a first round draft pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also probably means he has a good amount of help around him. If you think about the other things we've broken down, if he's doing, 15 points a game, some sort of average there, but you also have slightly better 3-point shooting than you had last year. And you also have, you have the ability to press. I mean, having a scorer like Derik Queen and Juju Reese on the floor at the same time really does allow you to set up that press. And how much those two play together is going to be very interesting. And obviously they did it before, but that is, like you mentioned, Sam, that is such a big thing to watch. They're obviously going to start every game together, or most likely going to start every game together. But, Willard said there's a chance that, it's going to be hard to keep them on the floor at the same time. Wants to have at least one of them. It stretches the other team's defense in a way that they wouldn't usually see. So that is definitely a very, very interesting thing to watch, how Willard manages Reese and Queen.
What do you think that Queen averages, and where do you think a reasonable kind of baseline is for him?
That's fair. I'll give you a floor and a ceiling. I think for the whole season, I think you could see him averaging like 11 or 10 points a game, just because of Julian Reese. And it's, he's going to play a lot of minutes, but big men in the Big Ten are not really known for playing a ton of minutes a night. And obviously in a season opener, you have more flexibility there. So I think the floor for points is probably around 10 or 11. And then the ceiling is probably 17, 18. Averaging more than that in college basketball is very rare to see. So that's kind of where I would put it. Rebounds, it totally depends on the night and who they're playing in the Big Ten, who they're playing around the country. Anywhere from, let's call it 6 to 15. I think it really depends on who he's matched up with and who Julian Reese is matched up with. The two of them are going to average a ton of rebounds, and they also have some more help with big men, with Kapari and with Geronimo. So the way those four players are cycled is probably going to be the lifeblood of this team, because guards are it's more predictable in how that will shake out.
Definitely. Well, I have some games for us now, considering we've kind of broke down all the players. guys, what's your biggest concern with this team? Biggest concern, and then also your kind of biggest reason for optimism, if you're looking at the roster elements, Mike?
Probably still shooting. I mean, they shot under a 30% clip from three Monday night against Manhattan. Um, I know Coach Willard said post game he's not concerned about that. He knows he has the pieces on this year's roster, but that's not the type of performance you want to see in the opening game of the season from three. And it just looked like it was continuing a trend from last season where the team struggled because they could not shoot. So if all you're getting is Queen down low, at some point they're going to start clogging the paint, and you got to start making threes. And if the threes aren't falling, then they're going to have real issues again.
The thing about the shooting too, and it's important to mention, we talked about the transfers being big on the shooting, but if you look at the numbers, last year for both Jacoby Gillespie, Rodney Rice, and Selton Miguel were a bit of anomalies in terms of how well they shot. So I'm going to read you guys the percentages. Selton Miguel, prior to last season, shot 22%, 20%, 33% from deep. Jacoby Gillespie shot it at a relatively better rate, but 29%, and then he had a 38% 3-point season last year. So that's not to say that those numbers will continue, but shooting, a 1-year aberration sometimes leaves some room for concern. I actually asked an assistant coach about that, and they said, I was like, well, what do you do to kind of like think about that? And they're like, you just got to hope that what they did was right. And if it's not right, then Maryland's in a really tough spot, because, those are the perimeter shot makers you basically have to have. So good point there, Brendan or Mike. Brendan, what do you think is kind of the maybe reason for caution with this squad?
Yeah, I mean, Mike said, I'm not going to go 3-point shooting, but just to add on a bit, looking at last year's stats, you mentioned it, you can only go with what you had last year. I mean, a coach is going to look at that, but it's not really Willard's job to be like, 2 years ago. So decision making on transfer portal, obviously are way behind that, but the 3-point shooters he brought in, if they did what they did last year, it's going to be a very, very fun team to watch. I would say the biggest issue is leadership. Maybe not something you were thinking specifically, but if you look at the returners, like Jameer Young was obviously the leader on the team last year. And in terms of leader, on the court and also scoring and also off the court. And when you have a bunch of guys who haven't been in college park before, who might step up to be the leader, not saying that Gillespie can't do that, not saying that that's not possible, but it's hard in your first year with a new school, with a new roster, with a new coach to kind of fill in that role. And it's not something I think happens immediately. So I would say that's probably the biggest concern that I have aside from 3-point shooting. That's kind of a classic Brendan answer.
Brendan not feeling a Julian Reese leadership role?
Not necessarily.
Valid. I'll switch it up and go with my biggest reason of optimism for this year's team. I think that this team's kind of interior defense is going to be even better than they were last season. I think that Willard's philosophy on defense is exactly what my philosophy would be if I were a coach. He forces tough mid ranges and teams to take brutal 3-point attempts, and I think they have a chance to really do that again. If right ingrained in this answer is my concern is that Queen out on an island against a versatile four, a small ball team, kind of scares me, but I think they have the options to play off that. You could just bench one of Queen and Reese and you have enough to kind of get through. But I think that the rebounding with the two of them in the Big Ten is so important, and I think it'll be really, really good this year. And I think that they're going to have two pretty solid shot blockers and versatile wing defenders, right? Wing defenders matter so much in college basketball. Miguel, Rice, Harris Smith, all pretty proven, solid defenders. I think that they have a chance to be, again, at the top of the Big Ten in defense this year. And if you just paired last year's defense with an even average offense or slightly below average, they're in the tournament, right? It was that last year was such an historically poor offense this season that kind of doomed Maryland. So that's my reason for optimism with this team. Guys, what's a game that you have circled on the schedule this year as kind of a make or break almost, in that you're looking forward to watching and kind of has your eyes on here early in November? Brendan, we can start with you.
I don't know if it's a make or break, but I'll offer two different games. The Marquette game coming up on the 15th, just over a week away. That's going to tell us a lot about this team. The first, strong opponent they're playing, the first probably top 50 Ken Palm team they're playing. And that's going to it's a home game. Red Oak, like that's a game that's like the kind of, in my view, the start of the season, right? That's going to tell us how Maryland's going to face stronger competition. We found out very early last year that it was not going to be that strong. And the other game I will say circled, at least at this point, is the Rutgers game. Rutgers is a very exciting team, bringing two of the top prospects in the country. And the Rutgers-Maryland game last year, I think the final score of the home game, both teams had like 50 points. It's one of the ugliest Big Ten basketball games you could watch. I think, 365 days after that game, it's going to be two very different Maryland and Rutgers teams, and it's going to be exciting to see two of the best freshmen in the country play. So those are the two games I have on the calendar. Also, it's kind of the classic Maryland rivalry, and not something you always think about for basketball. So that's what I'm looking for. How about you guys?
Also have two games as well. I'm going to say first one, December 8th at Purdue. Purdue was predicted to finish first in the Big Ten media poll. So that's going to be their first true Big Ten conference test of the season. And then I'm also going to say January 10th at home against UCLA. I'm sure Maryland fans remember what happened when UCLA came to College Park 2 years ago, right in the winter. I'm not sure, was that winter break or was that were students still there?
That was right before winter break.
Okay, yeah. So that was an ugly game. But then you also had Jameer Young's masterclass of a performance last season. So two completely different games against UCLA. UCLA was predicted to finish third in the Big Ten media poll, so that should also be an interesting one.
Yeah, you guys cheated and took multiple games, so I'll do the same. I was going to say the West Coast trip that they have right before that UCLA game. I think that'll tell us a lot. This team doesn't have a ton of tough road games. I think that playing Washington, Oregon, and then I guess coming home to play the Bruins will be interesting. But I'm actually going to go with a 3-game home stretch in February. Iowa, USC, and Michigan State within a 10-day span, 3 games at home against three teams that are two teams that Maryland is kind of, I think, right in the neck of the Big Ten conference race with, or I expect to be. USC probably near the bottom of that, but I think that if you can go 2-1 in that stretch, or maybe even 3-0, you're looking at a squad that might have the goods to be one of the top seeds in the Big Ten tournament. So definitely a interesting stretch there. And wrapping up, guys, let's kind of rip through these here real quick. Let's give me your record prediction, where they finish in the Big Ten, and who you think this team's kind of MVP will be once we wrap up in March, all the way down there. Crazy to think.
That's a lot to unpack. I'll go with the Big Ten record prediction because there's only really 3 important out of conference games, I would say, which is Marquette, Villanova, and Syracuse. I say they win every other non-conference game except for those, and then they go 2-1 in that. So let's go to Big Ten play. They play 20 Big Ten games. It's going to be a very interesting Big Ten schedule. I'm going to say they finish 14-6 in the Big Ten, which will probably put them somewhere in the top 6 or 7. There are some teams in the Big Ten who really aren't that strong, and Maryland fortunately plays them. So, yeah, I have enough confidence in this team that they will win a good amount of home games, kind of like we saw 2 years ago. And then Kevin Willard going on the road as the Maryland head coach in the Big Ten. He's been terrible. I mean, let's not forget that. Past 2 seasons, going on the road, pretty much going to be a loss every time. Maryland fans sure hope that's going to change, but until I see that happen in the first 3 or 4 road games of the season, I don't really think I'm going to believe it. So that's my Big Ten record prediction. Team MVP. I'm going first, so I have the very easy answer of taking Derik Queen. Just because he brings something to this team that they did not have last year, which is someone to sit next to Juju Reese and be an incredible big man. Then here becomes the very difficult part is what I think is going to happen in March. Maryland has been so bad in the Big Ten tournament as members of the Big Ten that thinking that they are going to win that would be very silly, and I do not think they will. I think they'll probably come in as 5-6 seed and then either make it to the quarterfinals or semifinals. And then all the way down the road, I think this team is a tournament team. I think if on Selection Sunday we're questioning, is Maryland going to be in, then this team did not do their job. But I would say a pretty easy prediction is they make it to the round of 32.
All right, I'll take it next. I think this team goes 15-5 in conference. I think the schedule sets up really nice for them. That probably puts them at, say, a 3 seed in the Big Ten tournament. I think this team's MVP, I'm gonna go with Jacoby Gillespie. I think that he's primed for a really, really nice year. I love him as a player. I think that his game, I think he might be more efficient than Jameer Young and more productive in the system. Everybody keeps saying, "Oh, he's not Jameer Young," including people on this podcast, and he's not. But I think that he fits the offense and is going to play his role in a more efficient way than Jameer did. And that's not a knock on Jameer. It's just the burden he had to take. So I'll take Gillespie. NCAA tournament prediction. I think they make it to the second weekend. Finally, Maryland makes it to the second weekend, but then loses in the Sweet 16. I think that Willard will kind of um, ease the concerns, I guess, of Maryland fans, and they would clearly be overjoyed, I think, with the second weekend appearance. I like this team's makeup. I like kind of the situation they're in with a wide open Big Ten and a pretty easy schedule. I mean, that could change. You never know. Teams are college basketball is the biggest ebbs and flow sport there is, but that's kind of what I'm looking at here in November.
I'm also going to say 15-5 in the Big Ten. The road games at Purdue, Indiana, Illinois, probably losses for Maryland. Those are going to be tough. Then they usually drop a few along the way that they shouldn't. I also don't think that they're going to finish 10th in the Big Ten like the preseason media poll said. I think that they'll finish higher. I do think that they'll make the NCAA tournament. I don't know about the second weekend. I think they'll probably lose in the round of 32. And then for team MVP, I'm going to say Kevin Willard. He had a big offseason, got the 5-star Derik Queen that he needed to, made the transfer portal additions that he needed to with Gillespie, with Rice, and obviously Monday night kind of saw how they will be a part of this team. And then he answered the questions. I believe they'll make the NCAA tournament. If he makes the NCAA tournament after that down season last year, everybody will calm down on him a little bit. So team MVP Kevin Willard.
Got to get a tournament win if you're Willard. Can't go with a freshman season with Queen and not do it. So
That's an awesome pick, Mike. I actually really like that. That's very funny. You're not wrong at all, though. We talked about floor and ceiling for Derik Queen. I want to ask you guys floor and ceiling for the NCAA tournament for Maryland. What do you think that is?
I think the ceiling is the second weekend. Like I don't see this team having enough depth or proven depth or that kind of like top end talent. I think Queen's really good, but it's so hard for a freshman to come in and be a number one option on a Final Four, Elite Eight team that I just don't see anything beyond the Sweet 16. The floor to me is they don't make the tournament and it's bad again. In the worst case world, Gillespie isn't as good of a shooter as he was. Miguel and Rice both proved to be kind of middling. Queen struggles with the physicality of the Big Ten play, and then you're left with basically last year's roster minus Jameer Young, and adding Queen. So at that point, I'd rather have Jameer Young than Derik Queen probably. So the floor I think is a year similar to last year where the defense is really good. I don't think they'll lose as many close games, so I think that the record will be better, but I could totally see another missed NCAA tournament bid.
Completely agree with Sam. I don't see this being a Final Four caliber team. Just not enough depth for that to happen. And then, like if all goes wrong, like Sam said, Queen can't adapt to the physicality, the transfers. That doesn't, their performances don't continue into Big Ten play. Worst case scenario, they don't make the Big Ten tournament. They don't make the NCAA tournament. And then the questions around Willard and can he lead this program continue to go.
Yeah, I'll offer a similar perspective, and very quickly at that. The ceiling, I would say, is the Elite Eight. I think they could win a Sweet 16 game. Matchup is going to depend a ton for this team. And then, it's very possible this team does not make the Big Ten, or does not make the NCAA tournament. Struggling on the road again, like they have in the past 2 years, could definitely be a factor to that when you look at what's all said and done with this team.
Definitely. That was our men's basketball preview. It's going to be an interesting winter here in College Park. Hopefully better than the biggest fall sport team, which is football. They didn't play this weekend. They go to Oregon and Eugene. I will be there. Excited for that. But it's going to be an interesting game. It was quoted in the last Maryland video where I said it would take a miracle to beat a former Pac-12 team. I think that I'm going to repeat the exact same thing. It's going to take a serious miracle. I really don't see Oregon is a terrible matchup for Maryland in itself. And then you add the fact that they're the number one team in the country playing at home, and Maryland has been on a downwards trend for a couple weeks now. Like, it's not, I don't see really any way in Maryland coming out with this. I think if you're competitive in the first half, it's probably a good sign, but I would guess something like 49-14, or something. What's the spread even for this game? I don't even know. I haven't looked. Probably I
Oregon by
would.
25.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid, and I might take Oregon if I were looking at it. So, not to be a naysayer after just hyping up the basketball team, but I think it might be a tough Saturday for the Terps.
I think it would be a tough game if Oregon was not the best team in the country. Like you said, Sam, if you're just playing an Oregon team that was kind of the middle of the road. The thing you have to remember is teams in this new landscape of college sports traveling 2 or more time zones, specifically in the Big Ten, have done very, very poorly. And I don't know. I mean, you saw USC come into College Park, and they definitely were not at the top of their game. And so, even if Maryland had to go play let's say they were playing Rutgers in Oregon, it's still going to be a very close game, and it's going to be very difficult because you have to go do that. This Oregon team is really freaking good. There is a reason, they're the number one team, and there's a reason they're the best team that has no losses. So, yeah, we're gonna have to see if Maryland can keep it competitive. And I think that would be the hope of Maryland fans is let's show us something that in the first quarter, in the first half. That has to kind of be the goal of this game, in my view.
I think that I'm storing on that exactly. Teams that have traveled over 1,500 miles for a Big Ten road game this year, 6-14. Maryland's game against Oregon is the second furthest that a conference game between the two teams. Only Rutgers and Washington was farther. So the travel element, if that doesn't already hurt, add in the fact Oregon's the number one team, I think you're probably looking at a tough one for Maryland. Brandon, take us through the rest of the sports and everything that's gone down really quick.
Let's do it. Obviously, big focus on men's basketball, but women's basketball started their season on Monday with a commanding win over UMBC. UMBC only scored 10 points in the second half. And if you're Brenda Freeze, that has to be a pretty good sight. They have Coppin State and Duke this week. That Duke game, revisiting an old rivalry, a top 20 matchup at College Park. I think their Xfinity Center will be pretty excited on Sunday, and especially for some of those Maryland fans who remember the good old ACC days. So that's women's basketball. We did our preview on them 2 weeks ago. If you missed that, go check it out. But we'll be back with a normal slate of reviewing sports, and we'll definitely be talking about that Duke game. Men's soccer had a brutal stretch to end the year. They only picked up 1 point in their final 4 matches and no points in their final 3, with loss to Ohio State on Sunday, which led Ohio State to win the Big Ten regular season, which Maryland controlled its own destiny to do just 2 weeks ago. Ohio State will be the number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament, get that bye that Maryland really, really wanted, and have home field advantage if we end up getting to the if Maryland had advanced to the final. They'll face UCLA on Thursday, a team they tied to, at home just 2 weeks ago. So a fresh opponent. This time they will not have. This time they will not have that home advantage at Ludwig. Both teams will be traveling to Illinois for that one. So men's soccer. If we're talking about them next week in terms of having a game, it's a very good sign. So we'll have to see on that one. Wrestling started their season against Kent State and Bucknell. 2 wins there. Let's go to field hockey. Great win at the end of the season against Penn State to set them up to face Iowa in the Big Ten quarterfinal, all here in College Park, Maryland. That's going to serve well for the Terps. Anytime you get to host a conference championship, that's a big positive. So we'll see what happens. They're on a collision course with Northwestern, obviously, once again. And that's going to be a brutal hill for Maryland to climb. But look out for a likely Maryland-Northwestern game in College Park, which is exciting for field hockey fans. So we'll have to see on that one. Finally, let's go to volleyball. It's been the same old. Have not won a game since October 5th. That feels like something we say about women's soccer. Two losses this weekend at home against two teams from Indiana, one of them being Indiana, the other being Purdue, 2-3-0 losses. They have Michigan State and UCLA this weekend and still have conference play until November 30th. So I have time to get some wins, but looking at the schedule right now, I'd say maybe only one or two more wins. Luckily, they get to play Rutgers again, who is their only win on the schedule. All right, that's the rest of Maryland sports, I hope, in less than 3 minutes. But you at home can pull out your stopwatches and re-listen to that and let me know how I did. Let's get everybody else involved. Mike, you now have 30 seconds to talk about Colorado football.
So the path to the college football playoff is still alive for the Buffs. So what they need to do is they need to go undefeated, close out the season perfect. And then they also need Iowa State to drop one more game. And then Colorado will jump them in the standings and they would play BYU in the Big 12 championship. If they beat BYU in the Big 12 championship, they are very much in the college football playoff conversation. And I think that this is great for the sport. I think it's great for Deion Sanders. I think it's very entertaining, and I think it's just magical the way that the season has kind of gone for them, especially the past weekend, having Iowa State lose that game and now having them tied for second place.
I'm going to throw some cold water on it, starting with our pick segment. Give me Texas Tech plus 3.5 to upset the Buffs. I would take the money line, but I don't want to be that much of a troll. Then I'm going to say UGA minus 2.5 against Ole Miss and wrap it up with Clemson minus 6.5 against Virginia Tech. Let's go. Shoot 'em, baby.
Wow. Way to pour cold water on that. I'm going to go with Alabama favored by 2.5 at LSU. I'm also going to take that Oregon spread against Maryland, 25 points. And then I like Ohio State by 38 against Purdue.
I didn't realize this, but I'm taking two picks that just completely troll Sam. I'll take the pick that is great and I feel great about. And I'll take Colorado minus 3.5 against Texas Tech. I guess all my picks actually troll Sam. Indiana minus 11.5 against Michigan. And then this is not so bad because he's not really, a big supporter of South Carolina football. However, he was there to watch that incredible win this past weekend. And I think that's a bunch of fake news. And I will take Vanderbilt plus 2.5 against South Carolina. They played an incredible game, but there's always a hangover effect. And Vanderbilt is 3 or 4 plays away from being the number one team in the country. So maybe that's a little bit of an overreaction.
It's crazy. Sam faded South Carolina last week and ended up going to the game and then rushing the field when they won.
Is that even allowed? That's hilarious to really think about. Hey, the pick did not win, so I guess that's all the proof you really need right there. We'll see. We'll see what happens this weekend with picks. I think I'm still down and out of the standings, but let's do Terrific Terp. This is pretty much a wild one, and someone not in the Maryland Athletics Hall of Fame. I tried to stay away from that one. I was looking through the old Maryland rosters and came across a pretty interesting name, so let's do it. This week's Terrific Terp gave up basketball for a period of time to play esports. Ken Oslander joined Maryland basketball as a walk-on in 2015 and appeared in just 9 games that season. He was also on the team during the 2016-2017, but did not see any action due to an injury. While at Maryland for those 2 years, he was lucky enough to be coached by his brother John, who was a former walk-on as well and was serving as a graduate transfer. John was in that role from 2014 to 2016. Kent had another sports skill, but it was not on a basketball court. It was with a controller. Oslander was a professional Madden player and a very good one. However, he is infamous for a very specific clip from the Madden Classic in 2017 where he overreacted to some plays that did not go his way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can definitely find the clip on YouTube. He was still creating Madden content until about 2 years ago, but then really focused in on his basketball journey. Let's go back to the court in a couple years back. After a season with injury, he graduated from UMD and decided to join the Coppin State team, but he joined that team when they were 15 games into the season. If you think this is a bit of a random move, well, you're probably right, but let's think again. Oslander's brother, John, who we already mentioned, was now an assistant coach at Coppin State, and there was another coach there who Maryland fans will definitely know, and that's legend Juan Dixon. Kent played 2 total seasons at Coppin State and led the team in 3-point shooting during the 2018-2019 season. Then, after his playing days, he hung around there until 2023 as an assistant coach. Oslander is now the head coach of the Clark County High School team in Virginia, made his way all the way to being a head basketball coach. Pretty impressive for a guy who was playing professional Madden 6 or 7 years before. the man with the weird mix of NCAA basketball player turned pro Madden player turned back into basketball player turned coach is this week's terrific Terp.
And then once again with a terrific Terp to close out the episode. And thank you all for listening to the very end. If you're still listening, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We got a TikTok page, YouTube, Instagram, X, wherever you want to find our media, you can get it. Thank you guys for listening.
Guess what? You've got Under the Shell Podcast. Nobody does it better.